Hello, my name is June. I am a... what am I? Hello, my name is June. I am a bass music producer, DJ, sound designer, music educator, and today I wanted to talk to you about what I believe to be Ableton's most underrated synthesizer. Most people who know me and who know my workflow are probably aware that I hardly use any devices outside of the native Ableton devices, and I'm a big advocate for that kind of minimalist approach. Now, you may feel a little limited by that, but because of this approach I've taken, I know more about this particular synthesizer than any other producer I've ever met. There's probably people out there who know more than me, but I've never met them. And that synthesizer is Collision. For those not aware, Collision is a physical modeling synthesizer, which means it specializes in emulating the sounds of physical vibrating bodies, like strings, bells, plates, tubes, and membranes, like drumheads. I feel like part of the reason people don't tend to know a lot about this synthesizer is because it lacks a lot of the features that we would typically expect from a synthesizer, like oscillators and filters and other modulation sources and stuff like that. So it can sometimes feel like it has a steep learning curve. I ordered Chipotle. Before I get into the nuts and bolts of Collision, I want to acknowledge that in Ableton 11, they're going to be doing a revamp of the interface with Collision, but Ableton has made it very clear that all the mechanics are going to stay the same. So if anything changes that I feel needs an update, I'll make an update video. So what kind of sounds can we actually make with Collision? Well, we can make a sound like this. We can make a sound like this. And we can make a sound like this. By the way, if you want any of these sounds, they are available on my new Collision preset/sample pack, available to all $1 patrons, patreon.com/June_Bernie. I release sample packs there once a month, and just $1 a month gets you access to everything I have ever made. So I would really appreciate the support, and the sounds are killer. Now let's get into what actually makes Collision tick. So the bulk of the synth is broken up into two separate sections. We have the excitator and the resonator. Admittedly, excitator was not a word I had heard before, but I looked it up, and apparently an excitator is a person who wakes up the other members of the monastery to begin their day. Nothing to do with the synthesizer, just thought it was interesting. In essence, the excitator is what makes the resonator make sound. Within this section, we have the mallet and the noise section. The mallet should be pretty self-explanatory. It emulates a mallet striking the object, but the noise is just a noise oscillator with an amplitude envelope and a filter. Within this mallet section, we have volume, noise, stiffness, and color parameters, as well as a toggle to toggle the mallet on and off. The volume, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain what it does, controls the volume of the mallet. The noise adjusts how much noise is in the mallet sound itself, so higher values are more noise, lower values are less noise. The stiffness value emulates how, I guess, stiff the mallet is. So like a high value would be something solid like a rock or a drumstick, and a lower value would be something like a piano mallet that's like covered in felt. The color adjusts the frequency of the noise. So higher values will give you kind of a brighter, more shrill sound, and lower values will give you a warmer, more mid-rangey sound. And as you can see, all of these parameters are keyboard and velocity mappable, with the exception of color. Now let's move on to the noise section of the excitator. We have toggle on and off, as well as low pass, high pass, band pass, and low/high pass, volume, and an ADSR envelope. This noise oscillator is super flexible. I like to think of it as kind of a bow. Like for example, if I take the attack time and fade it up like this, you can hear that the sound kind of gradually fades in, but you can also do kind of a mallet strike like this. I think this is what confuses a lot of people about Collision, because most synthesizers have things like square waves, sawtooth waves, etc., to generate the sound. So how do we generate melodic material with just a noise oscillator? That brings us to the resonator section. So this is really the heart of Collision. It's how you get all those cool, metallic, physical, model-y kinds of sounds. We have two resonators, which gives us a lot of flexibility. And the things I want to go over first are this drop-down menu and the XY pad. So let's go over the drop-down menu. Here you have all of our different models. We have beam, marimba, string, membrane, plate, pipe, tube, as well as a drop-down menu next to that drop-down menu, which controls the quality of whatever model you're doing. And then this XY pad controls two different parameters. It is the decay and the material. So decay does more or less what you'd expect, kind of like a reverb decay. It controls how long it takes for the sound to die out. But the material parameter is a bit more complex. Higher material values will ensure that higher frequencies of your sound will last longer, they'll decay slower, and lower material values will ensure that the lower frequencies will last longer. So I'm pretty sure I have that right. So higher material values are good for like glassy kind of metallic sounds, and lower values would be, I guess, things like wood, stuff that has more pronounced fundamental. You hear that? Up here it's kind of shrill. Down here we have a bit more of a round sound. Next, we have these three parameters on the left: ratio, brightness, and inharmonics. Now, these will change or disappear depending on what kind of physical modeling you're doing. For example, one that's really interesting is ratio will change the dimensions, like the physical dimensions of this hypothetical plate that we're modeling. So lower ratio values will be like a square, and higher ratio values would be, I guess, more like a long rectangle. So higher ratio values will create sounds that are more discordant, and lower ratio values will create kind of more balanced sounds. You hear that? Brightness, which is available on all of the parameters except pipe and tube. This is kind of self-explanatory. High values will make the sound really bright, emphasize the higher frequencies. Lower values emphasize more of the mid-range or lower frequencies. And the inharmonics, again, available with everyone except for pipe and tube, it's kind of interesting. It like spreads the harmonics apart. So higher inharmonic values will spread them apart, and then lower values will kind of like scrunch them in. So this kind of creates different kinds of destructive interference between the harmonics, gives you a bit of that kind of beating sound. And I find that it's generally used in pretty subtle ways, but it can be super effective. Lastly, in this section, you may notice that when you select pipe or tube, the inharmonic parameter changes to an opening parameter, which makes sense. And as you might guess, higher values imply a larger opening, and smaller values imply a smaller opening. I really encourage you to get a handle of these parameters all in the resonator section, because they really are at the heart of Collision, and getting to know them really well can ensure that you will make unique sounds. There are 4 other parameters that we need to check out in the resonator section. We have tune, fine, and under the pitch envelope, we have pitch and time. So the tune knob will change the pitch of the resonator relative to the incoming MIDI note. I usually use this to take one of the resonators up or down an octave just to kind of beef it up. And then the fine tune knob is great for getting that kind of chorusy, detune, respacey kind of sound. When you detune the resonators from each other just a little bit, it can really make all the difference. Now I'm going to quickly run over the 6 parameters on the right side of the resonator. So we have volume, bleed, pan, hit, listening right, and listening left. Listening left and right, I don't really understand, if I'm being honest. As far as I can tell, it's just adjusting the volume of the left and right channels. There's probably more nuance to it than that, but we already have a panning knob, so this hit parameter is actually quite interesting. This changes the point at which the mallet or excitator makes contact with the physical body. So higher values would be like somewhere close to the edge, creating a bit more thin, dissonant kind of sound, and then lower values would be hitting it right in the center, so it'd have a nice pronounced fundamental, kind of a warmer sound. The volume and panning knobs should make intuitive sense. They control the volume and the panning of this particular resonator. The bleed parameter, on the other hand, is quite interesting. So higher values will ensure that you're only getting like the resonator sound. while lower values will mix in more of the excitator sound with that sound. So I might compare it to like recording guitar in different ways. I don't know a whole lot about recording guitar, so this may not be the best analogy. But like there's different ways of recording guitar that minimize pick noise. So if I'm miking it up just like I am now, I'll probably get a lot of that pick noise. But if I'm using an internal microphone or a piezo pickup or something like that, I might get less noise. So before we move on to the modulation section, I want to briefly mention this structure toggle on the right-hand side. So we have the 1 going into 2, and then we have 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2, I guess you can kind of think of like double stops on a violin, like if you're playing like 2 different strings with 1 bow, except I guess in this case they'd be like different instruments with 1 bow. And then the 1 going into 2 will send the audio from resonator 1 into resonator 2 and resonate it the same way the audio from the excitator would go into a resonator. So if you're trying to mimic like a specific instrument, then try to think really hard about how these different bodies interact with each other. But if you're just like me and you just want to make weird alien bleeps and blorps, then just know that this will have a pretty dramatic impact on your final sound. Here you can select the number of voices that can be active at any time. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. You can do monophonic. I don't recommend doing monophonic, and I'll get into that later. Then you also have a retrigger function. So if you have this enabled, when you hit the same note twice, it'll just retrigger the same note. Rather, if you have it off, when you hit the same note, it'll activate another voice. Lastly, let's talk about the modulation section. So there isn't much here, to be honest. You got the toggles for both LFOs. Each LFO has a depth, rate, control, and you can key and velocity map both of them, as well as retrigger and offset. You got 2 destinations for every LFO available to all of these different parameters. To be honest, I kind of wish that they had an envelope of some variety. Like I can't think of many acoustic instruments that have that kind of like oscillating kind of tone to them, but something like an envelope I can imagine would have a bit more of a naturalistic character. So I've just gone through all of the parameters of Collision, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, why is this Ableton's most underrated synthesizer? For one, it's a physical modeling synthesizer. You don't come across many physical modeling synthesizers, so I think it's really cool that Ableton included one in part of their Live 10 Suite bundle. Actually, they included 2. There's Tension, too. We'll get to Tension. But I also want to come away with this idea that Ableton devices don't exist in a vacuum. They are all interchangeable. They all exist in this huge modular environment that we call Ableton Live. So if you take a look at the presets I made, I'm not going to open them up because I don't want to spoil the secrets, but it's not just Collision that's in there. It's also overdrive, saturator, phaser, flanger, chorus, OTT, multiband dynamics, compressors, delays, reverbs, like all of these things come together. And when you start realizing that Collision is just one of several instruments, you can get really great sounds like this. So now that I've spent all this time praising Collision, it is time to get into some of the limitations of Collision. For one, since everything based around this is kind of, revolving around the resonator, which is this kind of specialized delay, I guess you could think about it, everything you play is going to have a decay afterwards that you can't control. When you release the MIDI note, there's always going to be a little bit of decay. My workaround for this is usually to throw utility on after the Collision and then just automate in dips in volume when I needed to, so that I make sure that those tails don't clash with other sounds. The other one is that sometimes it just doesn't work. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes you hit a MIDI note on your keyboard and just nothing happens. Then you hit it again and then it happens. And then you hit it again and it doesn't happen again. And it's a kind of hit or miss. It gets more prevalent with more devices you have in your project and stuff like that. So my solution is usually to flatten what I have to audio, because even if it doesn't play in real time when I strike a MIDI note, it will still render the audio. I've never had an issue in that department. The last limitation I want to mention is that Collision doesn't have a glide feature. So this can create some issues with polyphony. If I set it to be monophonic, and I hit one note and then I hit another note, you're going to hear a very clear artifact when it jumps from one note to the other. You'll hear a little click. My solution to this is to make sure that there are a few more voices active in Collision than you need. I usually put like 3 or 4. I think it's 4 by default. So when you let go of one note and then strike another one, the tail can fade out of one before the other one comes in. That glide problem is very present when you're working with like pads. If you're playing a chord, and then you play another chord, you need to make sure that there are at least 6 voices, assuming you have 3 voices in each chord. There are at least 6 voices active so that the tails of the first chord can decay while the second chord sound comes in. And with that, we are done. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got some value out of it. Please like, comment, subscribe to all of these things. Follow me on the social medias. I got social media. Become a patron. You get sample packs. Also listen to my music. You can listen to it in all these places. Okay, thanks. Bye. Believe it or not, this is not the first time I've eaten Mexican food on camera. I did a Taco Bell / sound design mukbang production stream on Twitch like a couple months ago. Actually went really well. People seem to enjoy it.